All right, so we've got Phil, who is our former field director, David, who's our current field director. My name's Aaron. We're with OMF Taiwan, but Phil, why are you no longer our field director?
I got fired. Actually, there's a 10-year limit on being field director. So we get appointed for 2 years, then 4 and 4, and then after that, someone else takes over. And the idea basically is that the field director is not a promotion. It's taking on a role to serve other people for a period of time. And then eventually you need some fresh blood, fresh ideas, fresh energy, someone else to take over. And then it frees up me to go back and do more frontline ministry rather than permanently in the role.
Okay, so David, then what do you do? What does the field director do?
I think the field director does a number of different jobs. Firstly, it's a leadership role. So you help the field to make decisions about ministry direction, where ministry should be done, how ministry should be done. You're there to provide pastoral care for the leaders of the field, who then provide pastoral care for other members. You can't care for everybody in a field of 70, but you try and care for those who do the caring. It's also, you oversee a lot of the administrative role as well, making sure that everything gets done, from finances being handled to visas, caring for the staff in the office that deal with those things. But it's also, you're a representative of OMF to the wider church in Taiwan. So you're the person who goes to the churches and speaks to the pastors and is there as the representative of OMF before the church in Taiwan.
Okay, so Phil, you were also a field director. Is there things that you did similar or different as you carried
pretty
out
much
role?
the same. There's a lot of different dimensions. So the wider church world, the organisation, but I think I saw the primary responsibility was the members. So above everything else, I'm there to be an advocate, a support for the members. So I think both in terms of their personal life, that they're healthy, they're happy, just pastoral care, but then also ministry-wise to help them stay on track, help them talk through ministry issues, strategy. So the main thing I wanted members to know was that I'm here to serve you, above and beyond all the other external roles that we also do.
So is there anything you think we, the rest of us members, would miss if you didn't carry out your role?
One of the things I found is being field director, you're not always doing something, but sometimes it's just the fact that you're there. It provides a support and understanding to people that if they have an issue or question, there is someone sitting on the chair. When they call the phone or whatever they're doing, someone will pick up and answer. So I think without that, there'd be a lot less sense of security or, I don't know, just maybe who do I go to when I get into trouble? But the other issue, I think, is a lot of people are very invested in their busyness here and now, ministry here and now. And one of the things the field director has time and space to do is see the bigger picture and plan longer term. So I think people would not necessarily miss it immediately, but over time, there'd be mission drift and there'd be maybe a lack of focus and direction.
And you, David, is there anything people would miss if you just, weren't there?
Yeah, I think what Phil says is correct, that initially there wouldn't be, David's gone, what are we missing out on? But it is that long-term influence. As a field director, when you start the role, there's actually a feeling of loss in some ways, because you give up some of that ministry that you were doing, and you find yourself at first thinking, well, is what I'm doing important? But then when you step back and look and see the influence on the field, the missionaries as a whole, as you look in the direction that we're moving in terms of ministry, you realize you do have a very big influence. And one of those influences is just being there to give people a sense of security, to know that there's someone they can turn to, there's someone who cares about their ministry, there's someone who they can talk to if they get stuck, there's someone who's praying for them. It is very much a facilitating role, that you're there to make sure other people thrive. And that's how you live with what you give up, when you realize that, yes, I'm not having the fun of doing church planting and Bible teaching, but what I am doing is helping other people to experience successful Bible teaching, to experience successful church planting, in the directions that I'm steering them towards training, in the advice that I'm giving them, or in just being there so that they don't have to do certain things. And that's what makes the job very rewarding, is seeing other people thriving in the ministry, and that's what you're there for.
Yeah, I mean, I find it as a ordinary member, if there's something we don't know how to deal with, we think, oh yeah, before it was we'll go to Phil or we'll go to David. And I think it's a bit like having a captain on the football team. They may not be able to play every position better than everyone else, but their presence there makes the whole team play better.
Yeah, definitely.
And also because, as I discovered after you've been in the role for a while, because you're in this position where you're overseeing all the different ministries, you learn so much from that experience. I mean, we're actually in a very privileged position of being able to learn from what's going on in all the other missionaries' ministry. So rather than just learning from our own ministry experience, we're suddenly learning from all the different church plants. We're watching people make mistakes. We're watching people being successful. And so we're in a position to pass on some of that experience around the field. Again, that's a facilitation, and it's actually a great privilege to be able to have that experience.
Yeah. No, I think that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the role for me too. That I came and did student ministry, but the people I was leading were doing church planting or ministry to prostitutes and so on. And because I was working alongside them, supporting them, giving advice, I got a taste of that ministry. I understood what was involved, and I felt like I had a part of it too, even if it was an indirect part. So some of the new ministries that started up, for instance, one aspect of the ministry to prostitutes came about simply because I asked the right questions of our colleague who's doing the ministry, and it got her thinking, and she moved forward and she did it. But I could step back and think, oh, I actually had a part to play in that. And so that's a real privilege as well.
Yeah, and as Phil says, sometimes it's the questions you ask, or just the fact that you encourage someone by saying, yes, you could do that. Why don't you do that? I remember once in some ministry, someone came to me and said, oh, it would be really great if OMF could do this. And I just turned to him and said, well, why don't you do it?
You're OMF.
And so it got done. And it wasn't me that did it, but it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't said to that person, of course you can do that, go ahead. And that's great to see people moving on and trying new things and being able to encourage them to do that.
Now, there's an expression I learned just a few years ago. I think it was actually after I stopped being field director. But my fruit grows on other people's trees.
Right.
But in hindsight, looking back, I think that's very much true. It's not like I do it and I see the fruit directly, but I see the fruit through other people, but I've had a part to play by equipping or supporting or encouraging them. And so I think that the field director very much plays that role, and that's one of the biggest joys in doing the work too.
Yeah. Do you have any other joys? What's the best thing about being a field director?
Yeah, I think just interacting with all our different colleagues, getting to know them, their lives, their families, their ministries, being in touch with all of that it's a very broadening experience. So rather than just me in my little corner, which is very satisfying in of itself, just being able to touch many different aspects of ministry and having that vicarious joy and seeing, because of their ministry and people coming to faith, and being a part of that, maybe in just some small way, but still playing a role in that.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the exciting things is seeing missionaries develop, seeing people go through language study, go to their first placement, and just seeing them getting excited about ministry, or seeing ministries develop. So, as Phil said, just finding that joy in seeing other missionaries succeed is great. But another side too, I think, is that being the field director within Taiwan, people very much respect leadership positions within Chinese churches. And so you do get invitations to speak at certain activities or conferences, to share at Bible colleges. You get the chance to meet with Taiwanese leaders and interact with them and learn from them. And so there is that's a privilege as well. So it's that public face of OMF that opens doors to you because you're in this position. And that's one of the bonuses of being in this role.
But I think it varies a lot from person to person. One of the things I learned is that every field director brings their own gifts and plays their own role. And the field changes over time. And so what's needed at different times is different. So before I took on the role, I asked my predecessor, what do you like best about the role? And he really liked sorting out problems and even telling people, you shouldn't be here, you should go home. I thought, wow, he really enjoyed conflict, bringing positive results out of conflict, which I hate. But when I came in, we had quite a small field and we needed to mobilise. And so one of the roles I played was, along with my wife Irene, mobilising. And we travelled a lot, we encouraged people, and then we saw new people coming to the field. And so that was a great joy as well, but that was a particular role that we needed to play at that time. Whereas David is we're still mobilising, but now we have a lot of younger people and the need to develop and disciple them. And so I think it's not a one-size-fits-all role either. There's a lot of commonalities, but a lot of different role responsibilities depending on where the field's at.
And that's why it's very much a team ministry role. Although we have field directors, we also have other leaders on the field. And those other leaders make up for what's lacking in whichever field director, because no one person has all the gifts. Yeah. Some people may be much more pastoral, some people might be much more thinkers and strategic planners, but whatever your weaknesses are, you have to be humble enough to admit that and then find other members of the field who will make up that difference and will meet those needs for the field. So that's a very important part of a good leader, is being willing to admit what you can't do as well as understand what you do well.
So last question, what are some challenges in carrying out the role as field director?
Well, I think for me at the beginning, one of the challenges was learning what Phil said earlier about fruit growing on other branches. It was giving up that personal ministry. I was involved in church planting and then suddenly finding myself in a leadership role, having often to deal with problems, because it's not all about helping missionaries to thrive. Missionaries are sinners just like everyone else, and there's often conflicts, there's often people who are doing things they shouldn't do or not doing things they should do, and so you often find yourself dealing with difficult situations. And I found that really hard. I wasn't like that previous field director who likes to deal with conflict.
Not me, the one before me.
Yeah, the one you said before you, yeah. And so I was finding myself thinking, I'm a terrible failure, because all I'm meeting is failures, is conflicts, is difficulties. And I had to have God remind me that actually, if I was going to take responsibility for all the things that were going wrong amongst the missionaries, then I should take credit for all the things that are going right. In other words, there was a balance and understanding that I'm not just there to be blamed for the mistakes, but I should look and see what all the successes are. But it's still hard whenever you have a team of missionaries and they're not getting on. You feel like, well, shouldn't we all get on? We're all Christians. We're all here to serve the Lord. Dealing with difficulties and conflicts and sin is never easy. And as a leader, you can't avoid it, because it's your responsibility to deal with that.
Yeah, I think a couple of issues which David's already touched on. One is the stepping back from frontline ministry and seeing my ministry as now other missionaries, my primary ministry. So having to let go of some other roles. The other one, though, I think is just the fact that you're always on call. There are no boundaries. Over the 10 years, we had a few big personnel issues, a couple of deaths, a couple of major moral crises, which are draining. But it wasn't so much those, it's just there's always, out of 60 missionaries, there's always someone who is struggling, or there's always one ministry that has problems or tensions or whatever. So while a lot of people might be really happy and fruitful and going well, there's always something that needs to be addressed. And so just over time, you can never sit back and say, job done. And every time the phone rings, you think probably someone needs something or there's a problem. Because by the time it gets to the field director, it's already a bigger issue.
You've never not got an email that needs answering.
No.
You can never sort of go to bed at night thinking, I've cleared my slate, my inbox, everything is dealt with, tomorrow's a new day. You've always got something that you think, I should have done that, I meant to do that. It never stops. And that's just part of being in charge of 60 to 70 frontline workers who are sharing the gospel and engaging in spiritual warfare. So there's always, as Phil says, there's always going to be something, but there's always joys as well, and there's always exciting things. But so we have to teach ourselves, train ourselves, not to just focus on the problems, but also to, for the sake of the field, to focus on the successes, because our role is not just to deal with problems. Our role is to set the strategy, the direction, to think about how God is leading us. And that means looking at what's working, looking at where God is blessing the field, looking at the ministries that are growing and saying, what can we learn from these? Not just focusing on any problems.
And I think one of the challenges is, not being able to let go of those and hand them over to God. I think I found after my 10 years, I was pretty stressed, not burned out, but not far off it. Just being able to let go and realize it's not my job to fix everything, that there'll always be issues. But then in the midst of it too, then knowing how to find space and draw some boundaries. So like having vacations, leaving the computer at home. I think the first few years I didn't do that, and then realized if I'm going to survive and cope in this.
You can leave the computer at home?
Well, eventually I did, because I realized I just need time when I'm not thinking about ministry. Not going on vacation at the OMF retreat center, because there'd always be someone there who'd want to talk work, things like that. So I think that's the biggest challenge. But then very much, as David says, in hindsight, looking back and seeing the way God's worked through, not just as individuals, but as a field. And I think that's another aspect too, that seeing ministry it's the group. It's us as a fellowship, one another, serving one another in different roles. The key thing in ministry is not what have I done, but what has God done through us. And so I think as field director, we get to see that perspective of it, perhaps more than other people do. And so focusing on that and seeing that it's God's work, what's God doing, and dealing with the issues, but not letting them overwhelm everything else.
Yeah, and that is one of the joys of the job, is because you are seeing what God is doing amongst so many different teams. When you come to minister to people, you can bring that perspective and say, look, what this problem you're dealing with might seem like your whole missionary career is coming to an end and nothing can be done, but actually this is just very normal, and God is greater than all this. And let me tell you some wonderful success stories. Let me share from experience about that. This is just an opportunity for growth. God gives you that perspective and reminds you that it's not all about you as well. That there are many others on our field of missionaries who God is using to bless and to minister. As we minister to each other, He's given us many gifted people. And so it's actually a privilege to not just be the leader who's in charge, as if you're somehow better than everyone else, but being part of a team of people who are very gifted in different ways that God is using to minister to each other, and you're just there as a facilitator to try and make sure that happens.
Okay, thanks David. Thanks Phil.
So, thank you.